There we go. So when I looked back at my abstract that I had sent Lars many, many months ago, and noticed the title of my presentation said, or I guess what if you look in your agenda, Watershed Report Cards as a tool. What? So I will get to that. Before I get to that, I'm going to talk about conservation authorities in Ontario. I'll give you a little bit of background on the need for watershed monitoring and reporting. Then we'll get into the detail of the watershed report cards. And then I'm going to take a little bit of a tour, show you some case studies about turning that information into action, and then some lessons learned about communicating science. Perfect. So conservation authorities are unique to Ontario, and they're this weird hybrid. They're watershed-based agencies, but we have a mandate given to us by the Conservation Authorities Act, so a piece of provincial legislation. And we work on a watershed basis, but we're governed by the municipalities. So way back in the 1950s, the late 40s, early 50s are when most of the conservation authorities were established. And the municipalities had to get together and submit a request to the province to have a conservation authority, and it was all set up then through agreements. So we're funded partially through the municipal tax base, hence the need for the elected officials on our board of directors. But we also get money from the province through a transfer payment from the Ministry of Natural Resources. But we're also a not-for-profit registered charity, so we can access grants and funding from other places. So we're sort of a quasi-NGO. We have the ability to act as an arm's length advisor, essentially, to our municipalities on environmental matters. So we do act as a commenting agency under the Planning Act. I'll go into the Conservation Authorities Act in just a moment. So a lot of people say, well, what are you? And so it's a little bit difficult to describe, but that's essentially what we are. We're trying to do our implementation at the local level, and partnerships are really critical to what we do. As most environmental organizations are, we're underfunded and understaffed and all of those sorts of things. So we do our best to leverage as much as we can through partnerships with all levels of government, community groups, and anyone else that wants to work with us, universities, and that keeps life very interesting. You can see where we're established is primarily southern Ontario. There are a few conservation authorities in the northern part of the province around the major population centers, so Thunder Bay, North Bay, Sudbury, Sault Ste. Marie, those areas, but we're primarily focused along in southern Ontario. And you can see my watershed with the big arrow, the Otonabee region watershed. So my watershed is just under 2,000 square kilometers. So one of our earlier presenters talked about their watershed is 22,000 kilometers, so hats off to you, that's incredible. In our 2,000 square kilometers, I've got 8 member municipalities, 3 major rivers, 8 lakes, so that's the environment that I'm working within. The major population center in my watershed is the city of Peterborough, about 75,000 people, and then the rest is predominantly rural agricultural. To the north it gets a bit interesting because it's the Canadian Shield up to the north. And I actually only have a half a watershed. The northern part of the headwaters of my watershed are actually not under our jurisdiction. The population is very sparse, so to try to deal with all of those areas with such a limited tax base would make things really challenging. So we have a bit of an interesting time in that we only deal with half of our true watershed. Okay. So the programs undertaken by conservation authorities vary. This is a bit of a snapshot for you. So we do watershed planning. We also regulate development in floodplains along shorelines and watercourses. We do flood warning and flood forecasting. Depending on the size of the conservation authority, it depends on the nature of those activities. Many conservation authorities operate dams and do the water level management, and some don't. But everybody's involved to some degree with flood warning and flood forecasting, and low water response is also sort of a new responsibility. We do environmental education and public involvement, watershed health monitoring and reporting. We also do drinking water source protection in partnership with the Ministry of the Environment. Watershed stewardship projects. We own conservation lands, and some conservation authorities operate recreational properties, And what this does is provides a revenue source, but it also provides public access to water. And in Southern Ontario, that's really important. We're in sort of cottage country in the Lake District, and if these properties weren't owned by either the township or the conservation authority, there are many lakes where you actually wouldn't have any public access. So that's a really important role. We also assist with the protection of natural areas and natural heritage through those responsibilities of commenting on planning and development applications, and then communications and education. So I'm going to focus on the watershed health monitoring and reporting component of our activities today. And this gives you a little chronology of how we got to this place and why we're doing it. But what you see there is an 8-year process of developing these watershed report cards. So most conservation authorities have been doing some monitoring. We do a lot of it in partnership with the province. So we collect samples monthly. We do that for free, and then the province analyzes them for free. So that's a good partnership. What we found is that we were doing a fantastic job of collecting data. We were doing a horrible job at reporting on it. We all had mountains of data. Periodically, we would give them to university researchers, folks that were interested, but we didn't do anything with it. So we said, okay, we've got to change that. And it was partially as a result of this real public demand for environmental education and information. People wanted to know why, the why should I care part of the question. Well, so what if I can't swim in water? Does it really matter? Well, there's not fish here. Well, then, you know, it doesn't matter. So we really recognize the need to be able to get that information out there. So we have an umbrella organization called Conservation Ontario, and they put together a very comprehensive guide on how to do this, because everyone was doing it differently if they were doing it at all. So what we have now is this standardized process that we can all 36 conservation authorities can do to get this information out there. And the standardization gives us the ability to roll up the data and look at it provincially, as well as have some good technological and scientific background data. You know, how did you get to that number? Did you get it the same way as your neighbor? And when we have municipalities that cross boundaries into conservation authorities, it becomes even more important to have that standardized data, because the one municipality doesn't want to get, you know, two data used, evaluated using two different standards. So this is what we ended up with. What you see on the left, the Watershed Report Card 2012, that's the cover of the one that we're going to be publishing this fall. In the middle, you've got some of our staff actually collecting the benthic macroinvertebrate samples. And on the right is the document, the guidance document that gives you the how-tos. And I've actually had Conservation Ontario put that in the public access portion of their website. So I'll direct you to that at the end of my presentation. But it's really well done, and it's comprehensive, and it shows you how to deal with your data so you can get the standardized rankings. So what are we going to do with this? What are we using this for? Well, part of it is that public education component, and part of it is being able to get that scientific information into the hands of the decision makers, because that's who's on our board of directors, that's who we speak with most regularly, that's who we're dealing with related to land use planning applications. So now they have this information so they can start to understand those cumulative impacts and actually see what's happening on the landscape and what that means for environmental quality. So we're going to be producing these every 5 years. 1 year, you don't have time to deal with your data and then publish it. But it doesn't mean that in that 5-year period you're not doing anything else. And again, depending on the capacity of the Conservation Authority, some people will be updating them during that 5-year period. Some people will be doing companion pieces. But it will always give you something to help improve your local knowledge and motivate some action. What these don't do is look at sustainability or health or wellness per se. On the back page, because we're all using a standardized format, that back page is kind of fair game, and we'll get into that in just a minute. And that gives you the ability to look at some other indicators, but I like to say it's a starting place. We spun our wheels for an awfully long time trying to get somewhere, and so now we have this template, so it's a great beginning. So what we're doing is reporting on water quality, forest conditions, and groundwater. Now, if If you have more data, you can certainly use that. Those are the bare minimum standards that we're using. And it's giving us the opportunity to talk about how the health of our environment can impact the public. And so some of the work that Karen was mentioning and starting to develop those linkages between public health and environmental health is what we're going to start using in our messaging in these watershed report cards. So that's really exciting to start bridging that gap between public health and environmental health, because it's challenging. And I think I've heard a couple of people talk about not speaking the same language. And so if you're not from a public health organization, you don't know what the words are and how to communicate that. So we're hoping this will be a good tool for that. The other thing this does is we can use these as a tool for motivating people for a couple of things. Motivating people to take action. So if you start to see that your water quality is terrible, well, what can you do? So we're also including that kind of information to help people understand the value of